Hey guys, what's going on? This is Don and I am back with another tutorial for you today. We are gonna be in After Effects and this is what we're gonna be making today. So it's this Earth holographic animation, and everything you saw there was created inside of After Effects using just one plugin, and that's Trapcode Form. So that's all you will need in order to follow along, and there's a lot to cover in this one, so we're just gonna jump in and start building. Okay, so this is what we are going to end up with, or something similar to it anyway. And like I said, this was all done with Trapcode Form, so it's just the same effect on different layers put back together to achieve this final style and look. So let's create a new comp and start building another version of this. So if I get a solid, let's call this form and apply the Trapcode Form effect. And in the base form, we want to change it from the default box to sphere layered, except we just need one layer. And let's make it larger, so I will go for 500 by 500 by 500. And then for particles in X, I will go for 400, and particles in Y, it's going to be 200. Okay, so you will also need this image right here. It's just a black and white map of the world. In fact, I will make this into a new composition, bring it into our main comp below the form layer. We don't need to see it, so turn it off. And in the form settings, under layer maps, we want to go to the size submenu and point to that layer. Now you see the white parts, we still have particles, and the black part is kind of the ocean. So this is now working, and if I just quickly get a camera, I will use a 50mm preset and I can orbit around this so you can see how this is working. That texture or that image we used maps onto a spherical shape, and that's how we get this globe world map. Okay, so that's just the first part. We need the border section as well. And for this, we will need to make some changes here. So I will make another copy of this, drag it to a new composition. And in this one, I will duplicate the image layer. And in the track menu, which if it wasn't there, you just press F4 to cycle through the two different views. And now I can set this to Luma Invert Matte. And this is going to give you this weird looking, stroked version of the map. We want to increase the size of this border. So the way to do this is go to the top layer and put a blur effect. I'm going to use the fast box blur. I've done this before, so I know the numbers I need to use here. So for the radius, I think it was about 30. This will create this weird feathered edge kind of effect. We need it to be sharper and more defined. So we just need to put a solid layer below everything. And then on top, we need a adjustment layer with a levels adjustment. Now I can use this to define that border a bit better. So we need more white, so just bring it this way. And then also we need to subtract some of the black areas. So you would bring this in from the other side. And I think this here could work for our scene. Let's go back here, and we will also drag that comp here. And in fact, let's call this borders and shut this off here too. And I'm just going to build this all into the same solid layer, because you can actually have duplicates of the effect and it's still going to work. You just need to make sure though that your blending mode for each layer down here, so under rendering, this will need to be set to something like screen or add for the two layers to be both visible. And in the base form again, or rather in the layer maps, I will go to the size and let's choose our borders. And as I do that and shut off the other layer, you see what we have now. So it's basically the same idea, except this time just the border section. Okay, it might be a good idea to use the actual colors that I want. So this is in the particle section. For the main map section, it's going to be this deep orange kind of color. And for the outer border section, we will have a more yellow color. So I think around 40% for the hue. Okay, moving on, we can refer to our example. I can see that the map section was a bit lower compared to the border. So if I come back to this, in the main section, which I will name correctly, and the borders section, in the main one, I'm going to go to the base form and let's drop the size down to 465. So we just have this slight offset in the positioning. Maybe not as extreme as that, but the idea is to just have the border floating above. It just gives it a bit more volume and shape. The next thing I'm going to make here is the hexagons you see underneath everything there. So in our main comp, I will just duplicate one of these layers, let's say the borders, and we can just take away the layer map for now. So let's set that to none. And in fact, I will just leave this layer by itself like this. You can see this is a custom particle shape. So in a new comp, 100 by 100, and let's call this hex number 1, we will create a new shape layer and use the polygon tool to just draw a hexagon. So this will always draw from the center. So let's try and get this as perfect as possible. If I press shift and try to fill out the frame like this, and you can see it saved my settings from the previous time I did this. So a stroke of 2 pixels and using a fill color of that similar kind of yellow orange, and then the fill color is a darker orange. And we can, again, anything we use in the form effect needs to be in the same composition. So let's just drag this down here and turn it off. So if I go back to the form layer, we can change the particle type from the default sphere to textured polygon. And under texture here, this is where we load up our custom particle shape. And it might take a while to load. So let's reduce the number to something like, I don't know, let's say 40 and 20. And the particle size set to 10. And now we see how this works. And we can do things like play with the size random. So if I just set this to 100, now we have some variation, and maybe make this a bit larger. The only problem with this is if I bring back the other layers. So this is kind of working, but not totally, because the hexagons are not oriented to the surface of our globe. You can see they're all facing the same direction, and from some angles they just disappear completely. So in order to get the right type of distribution, And let me get my example again. You can see that these hexagons are facing the outside all of the time. They are really on the surface of this globe. So what we need to do is go back to our form settings and change the base form type from the default sphere layered to OBJ model. And now down here under OBJ settings, there is an option for 3D model. And in this case, that's just the sphere which I prepared for the tutorial in Cinema 4D. So this will be available for you to download so you can follow along. But it's just a sphere with the isosahedron type. By default, it's just the standard, which has segments at the top here closer to each other than in the central region. So this would not be very useful because we want equal sized segments, or as close as possible. So if I change that to isosahedron, and now we get this. All right, and this would just be exported to an OBJ wave front. It's the last one on the list here, and save this to somewhere on your hard drive, and make sure that normals are being exported and you want the vertices information. Okay, so like I said, this will be available for you guys to download anyway. Now another problem you might experience is when you try to import the model into the project. You can see I've already done mine here. Sometimes your OBJ import plugin may be missing. This comes with the Trapcode Form, but if you change the version of After Effects you are using, it's possible that that plugin does not get moved automatically. So I am using CC 2017, and in my support files and plugins, there is this format folder which includes, I think, one of the Trapcode OBJ formats, as you can see here. So if that's not there, then you will need to find this, and mine was located in one of my previous installs in the support files, where it was left in there somehow, and I had to move it back to my latest install, and then I was able to import the OBJ model. Okay, so back to our scene. In the base form settings now, let's load up the sphere model, and I will drag this into the comp, turn the eye off because we don't need to see it, and the 3D model I will just point to that sphere. And as soon as I do that, now you see the hexagons are facing the correct direction. They are now oriented based on what part of the globe that they are. You can see there is too many of them here, and I've already played with some of the settings, it seems. The size random, and so on. The vertex here, skip vertex control, this is what you use to reduce the number of particles you have. So if you skip, let's say, every fourth vertex, it means in general you will end up with less particles. So if I set this to 10, that means it's skipping a lot of the vertex points, because they are being used as the point at which a particle is being placed onto, and a vertex is just means a point on the sphere shape. We need to make this a bit smaller, so let's go to the size. I'll make it 450 by 450 by 450 so that it's more on the inside of this shape. Okay, so it may start to get a bit busy looking in our scene, but at the end, when we start to play with some depth of field blur effects, this will help to focus on certain parts of the globe rather than have all of them, super sharp like this. Anyway, let's move on. I think the next element we will create is these markers you see on top of the world map. And as you can imagine, they were also distributed using the sphere model. So we will duplicate this layer and we'll call this one hex number 2. And I'm going to create another custom particle, so 100 by 100. And in this one, we'll create another shape layer with another hexagon starting from the center. And the stroke is going to be 12 pixels. There is going to be no fill, so just hold ALT and cycle through this until we have no fill. And I think the color needs to be, okay, that yellow on the outside, and the inner one is going to be white. So if I duplicate this layer and make it smaller, let's go for 50%. I will then change the stroke width to, in fact, no, this is the one that needs to be 12. The original needs to be 6. All right, so the second one is going to be white. And I can take this, bring it into the comp, go to the form settings and change the particle type, or the layer rather, to hex marker. So I think with this one I will skip a lot more vertex points. I think there just might be too many there. For some reason my other ones have disappeared. Okay, I think that's just because they are overlaid on top. So let's try and misalign these just a touch. So if I change this to something like 12, that's going to generate a different pattern. And of course this one will be at the very top, so I will bring the positioning to, or the size rather, to 500. Okay, so that's how we do that particle type. It's very simple once you have the setup done, and I mean, you can continue to play with things like the size. Maybe you want to have them larger. It's really up to you at this point what you want to do. Next thing is the other part of the marker, which is this rod or pillar. So let's create a custom particle for that. So I think this comp is only going to be 10 pixels wide, but 200 tall. And because of the way particles work, this shape needs to start in the center and only be drawn in the upper section. So if I get a pen tool on my new shape layer, I will just draw a line like this, and the stroke width I will just set to 2. And this is going to be our rod, and click OK. And if I go back to the main comp, I will duplicate hex number 2, and let's call this rod, and just change the particle layer to our rod layer, which I haven't brought in here yet. So let's do that. And now we have the same rod, and it's still being mapped onto the OBJ model. Now this one we will need to rotate and possibly make smaller. So let's go to the rotation and work out which one needs to be adjusted. And it looks like I might be rotating the wrong thing here. This is in the base form settings. We want to change the particle rotation. So open that. And it looks like it's rotate X, but the other way. So minus 90 degrees. And now this is working. I can see the particle in the center there. So let's make sure we shut this off so we don't have any issues with that. And let's see here, the size random is still working, which is why we have shorter pillars and some of them are larger. But the overall size of this I will drop down to something a bit more reasonable. Let's say about 3 or so. That seems to be similar to what we have in this example. Anyway, that's how we do that. In this scene also, you have some constant movement on the particles. They are always rotating and getting smaller. So we want to replicate this same type of animation. So this will be done quite easily in the rotation settings. We are only interested in this particle right now. If I go to the particle rotation, one of these is the right axis. So it looks like it's the rotate Z. And I will use an expression here instead of some keyframes. So if I hold Alt and click this, I will just do time times, let's say 50. But that might be too fast. But actually, no, that works quite well. So that's how you get the constant rotation. And you can speed this up if you want by just, bumping up this number. So let's say time times 100. That's going to be twice as fast, which is too fast in this case. And by the way this is working, it just takes the time which is going up over time and multiplies it by any number. So this is always going to be going up at a constant speed. Okay, so how do we get the random size change? We can go to the fractal field and we want to affect the size. Now it's always a bit tricky how much you want to do this by. Let's say 10 to begin with, and that might be the best number actually. You can see that it's scaling up and down randomly like this. Now the actual animation of scaling up and down might be too fast, so you have to go to the flow evolution here and change this down. Basically, let's say 20. That's going to make the animation slower. And you can even play with the F scale. That's the size of the fractal field which is being generated. So 10 means quite large. If I go to 100, you will end up seeing more localized animations like this. Now this is now too fast, so we have to maybe drop it down to about 50. And this is what you will see. These numbers sort of work together to produce your result. So if you change one, you may have to go back to the other one and adjust to make sure that everything still behaves correctly. Okay, I can bring back my other layers and let's see what's next. And actually, I think I want to do the same sizing with the fractal field on the rod layer too. So I was using 20 here with an F scale of 50, I believe, and effect size was set to 10. Now this is totally going to change the size of these rods. So maybe drop this to 5. And also the size of the particle I will just bring down a notch, because I think right now it might be too large. So let's go for 2 instead. Okay, but the result is just this constant random movement like this here. This might be too fast though for these rods, so let's just slow this down. So if we drop the evolution to 5, that seems to be a bit better for this. Okay, play around and see what you need to do for your scene. Okay, the next elements we will make are the floating particles. This will be I think a lot simpler than what we've done up to this point. So let me create a new form effect for this, because we are kind of resetting. And again, we'll go to sphere layered, just one, And the size for this one is going to be 700 by 700 by 700. Except particles in Y, we will have this at just 1. So we have a single disk arrangement of particles like this, and particles in X, let's go for maybe 200. We may adjust this depending on how it looks in a second. Let's go to the particle setting. This particle is going to be larger than before, maybe 2, and sphere feather all the way up to 100%. And we want to go to the disperse and twist, and let's set this to maybe 50, but that's too much. Maybe just 20, so we have some movement here. And in the fractal field settings, I want these particles to be moving up and down constantly, but only in the Y direction. So if I change this to XYZ individual, I can use the Y displace on its own. Let's set this to 20. So if I play this now, we have some movement in the particles. I would change the scale, however, to 100, so the movements are closer to each other. The evolution will just drop to like 10 or something, because I think that was too fast, and I think even that's still too quick. So let's drop it down even further. I just need some slow movement. I'm also gonna have this rotating around anti-clockwise if you're looking at it from this angle. So I will go to the world transform, and one of these rotations is what we need. It looks like the Y rotation, so we need it to spin this way. And again, we will just use an expression here. So if I do time times 8, this slow movement. Another level of movement which we have is, in addition to spinning around the globe, they are also moving up and down, rotating around the center axis. So this will be on the X and Z rotation. I will use some expressions here too. If I just hold Alt and click, except this time it's going to be a wiggle expression which generates random numbers in a specified range. So if I type in wiggle and then open bracket, 0.1, that's the speed. So that's how many times this is going to move every second. And then if I put a comma and then type out 40, that's the range allowed for the movement. So it will be somewhere between 0 and 40. And as I do this, now you can see this is spinning and also changing its tilt. So that's on one axis. We might as well do this on all of them. So for the Z rotation, just copy and paste the same expression. So we just generate some random motion. Now I think that might be too quick now with the two expressions on at the same time. So let's go to the speed here and put this to 0.05, which is half of what we had before, and copy and paste. And I prefer this slower motion. Okay, so that's one layer. I think I had 6 instances of this, and it was in this kind of pattern. I'll call this the belt. Duplicate this and make it larger. Let's go for 1,000 this time. So this is kind of the next layer. And I will duplicate one more time and make this one 1,300. So with the 3 layers, I have this kind of thing right now. Let's zoom in here. And this just gives us some nice particle movement. Now I need more, so I'm just going to duplicate this all at the same time. So now I have 6 instances of this, and what I can do is maybe go in here and just change the size slightly. So instead of 700, I would go for 750, so that they're not completely in the same spot. And just do this for each of these here. So 1050 here. And for the last one, we'll change one of them to 1350. Let's quickly go to the camera. So if I press A twice and enable depth of field, I will set the aperture to, let's say, 50. So we have some really strong blur. And the blur level I will even increase to 200% to really exaggerate the effect. And the focal distance, we'll just need to figure out where this needs to be. Let's say 10,000, 1,000 rather. That's not close enough, I don't think. We can bump this up. So about 1100 at this distance seems to be correct. Okay, and when we do this, it kind of helps to separate the foreground elements from the background. When everything is too sharp, it's hard to tell what's going on, but this helps out quite a bit. I think my world map particles might be too large. Let's drop them to 0.5. And if we continue, you can see we have some orange lines around the globe as well. So if we duplicate the setup we have for the belt, except this time it's going to be orange belt. Let's start with the inner line. So this is going to be 700 as well, except a hell of a lot more particles. Let's go for 1500. We'll give them that same orange. The size I will leave at 1 and size random all the way to 100. But this time I don't want any dispersion, so drop that to 0. And even the fractal evolution or the flow, I will just 0 this out too. So we end up with just a line around our globe. And let's just copy this and put the size of the sphere to 1000. This time just creating another layer with an offset, and then one more time at 1300. So this is kind of the first level of this. I will then duplicate all 3 orange belts, and let's just drag them to the bottom of the list here so I can kind of keep track of what's going on. And in these ones I will then use the dispersion. So let's go for something quite high. Maybe 100 is too much though. Let's say about 50 in the dispersion of each of one of these. And if you want to have some animation in these, you can maybe go to the fractal and do something similar to what we did up here, but I think I will stick with just the dispersion. And we're just continuing here to build up these layers and more detail. I think my white particles, there might just be too many there, so I would perhaps turn those down in terms of their numbers, just so we don't have as many. So let's go for 100. And you can see that these can be controlled at the same time, which is really useful, because imagine if you had to come back and do this one by one. Okay, getting close to the end here, the final layer is going to be this atmosphere effect that you see, this glowing blue color. So this was just another instance of the main world map. So if I duplicate that, we want to change this to a blue color. And this color scheme looks pretty interesting, actually. Maybe I should do an example with this. But if I come down here, I can see my rendering is not set to screen on the first layer. So let's do that. And on this one, I'm gonna have maybe a size of about 480. So something like that. We don't need any image map for this. So let's unload the image layer. And also a lot less particles. So I'm gonna have 50 and 25. But they're going to be much larger. So let's say something like 10, which is not nearly large enough. Let's go for maybe 20. I'm trying to remember what I used before, but I can't really think. But the opacity will be turned down to something really low. Let's say like 2 or maybe 3 or something. The idea is to just create a slight atmospheric blue effect and maybe set the size to 40 to make it stronger, but turn down the opacity so we have no gaps, basically. You could also take this effect away from this layer, create a new solid, paste it back in, and put a blur layer, so fast box blur, just to make sure you clean up any gaps that could be in there. And let's set this to screen for the final result. I think it just might be too strong, so even 1 will work. And as far as creating the elements or the different layers, that would be it. We just now want to do some camera animation, and then maybe adding certain effects to separate layers to enhance them, such as glows and stuff like that. So let's start with our camera. I will open the transform options of this one, and let's turn auto orient to off. It's just easier to control without it being turned on, except now we need to zero out where the camera is looking. I rarely work in a 1280 by 720, so I'm never sure what these numbers here need to be. So just set the position to 640 by 360. I believe this will center the camera pretty well. Okay, and I will get a null. And if we go to make this a 3D object and attach the camera to this, I am going to use the null to rotate my camera around the globe. So let's define our end position. I think I want to be looking at the African continent. So something like -10 or something, and set a keyframe there. Go back to the beginning and spin it the other way. So I will start at about 90 degrees, just past the South American continent, which is right there. So this will be spinning this way, and we will end up at this kind of position. But along with the rotation, I also want a zoom animation. So if I go to the camera and set my end position, which I think right now I am too close. So let's just zoom out a touch, maybe about here. At the beginning, I want to be right next to the particles there. So I don't know what number I will use here. Let's try something like -400. We can perhaps turn off the depth of field. I might be able to see easier. This is clearly the foreground part of the animation. So okay, I think I am roughly in the correct position, and that's the other side of the map you can see there. So okay, let's turn this back on. We want to start with something being in focus, I think. So let's drop the blur level to 100, so it's a bit more manageable. Let's start focused on the stuff which is actually in the distance over there. So I don't know whether this means increasing the distance or decreasing. It seems it's about decreasing. So let's say about 600. And now we are focused in the distance over there, so the foreground is totally blurred out. And as the camera moves, there's a part where one of these continents comes into focus. So I want to go there. Let's go to about 400 to bring this back to the front. You can see the South American continent. I'm just trying to pinpoint the perfect focusing position, and about 350 is going to work here. So as that rolls in, we will focus on it straight away. So maybe something like this, and just adjust the movement. Okay, that should happen pretty quickly. And at the end, we will set this to a much higher number. I think 1100 was the right number, which gives us this here. So throughout all of this, we should always be focusing in the foreground and trying to blur the background. Okay, it can be quite abstract, but I think this will work here. And at certain points, we can exaggerate the blur too. I like the level of blur here, so let's animate that. But towards the end, it kind of maybe isn't strong enough, so maybe we could bump it back up to 200. But this is really just down to personal preference. And that would be my camera animation. There is a weird dark border going on. That's because of the blur effect on this layer without the repeat edge turned on. So that's how we fix that. The last thing I'm going to do is to take certain layers out of the main form layer and apply effects to them separately. So for example, the hexagon markers, which I believe is hex 2 and rod, I will take these out of here completely, get a new solid layer, and put them into that instead. And the blending mode would be set to screen. And this means I can now apply a glow effect to this layer just on its own. So if I go to the glow threshold, maybe drop it to about 40% and start with a radius of about 10. Maybe duplicate the layer, bump this up to about 80 and a radius of about 50. So just trying to make those stand out a bit more. And I would do this for any element I want to exaggerate. And in this case, I think my world map might be too faint. So maybe go to the size and bring it back up to 1 again, but maybe play with the size random and see what we can do with that, just to create something that looks a bit more varied. Maybe 0.75 for the size, something like that. And I think I'm going to put the border on its own layer as well. So just cut this away and let's create another solid and do the same thing. Blending mode set to screen, and again just applying some glow effects to this layer individually. And this is something you'll have to just do according to your own taste. I always have 2 levels of glow, one much smaller but brighter, and then a more diffused, larger radius type of effect. Okay, so I would say this is looking pretty cool. I actually like this a bit better than this example we ended up with. They are very similar though. On top of all of this, we could maybe put an adjustment layer, go to the color correction and curves, and just put a slight fade on top of everything. So let's say some blue and maybe some green as well, just a small touch. And I won't really do much else. A lot of this look is achieved in the you know, the colors and the particles and all the various layers. The one thing I would just do here is make sure that I have a solid below everything. But that would be it. That's the end of the tutorial. So just by combining many layers of the same Trapcode Form effect, you'll be able to create a pretty complex looking holographic animation such as this one right here. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned some new stuff, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll see you next time.